Tonight on KQED Newsroom, we begin with a dive into the rich cultural tapestry of Oakland with the hosts of the Hella Black podcast, who are premiering their new film, Tales of the Town. And missed deadline. Planning agencies across the state fail to deliver critical housing plans. We discuss the consequences. And several cherished Castro neighborhood establishments are closing their doors. Why are so many landmarks disappearing there? And what does it tell us about the changing face of San Francisco? Also, immerse yourself in something beautiful as we explore the timeless charm and elegance of a little-known literary haven. Coming to you from KQED headquarters in San Francisco, this Friday, February 3rd, 2023. Hello and welcome. This is KQED Newsroom, and I'm Priya David Clemens. On Sunday, hundreds of people marched in Oakland, protesting the actions of Memphis police officers who brutally beat an unarmed black man, Tyree Nichols. Nichols later died of his injuries. As many continue to express outrage, a new short film travels through 100 years in Oakland's history and activism. The creators have been engaged in social activism in Oakland for many years. Their new documentary short is titled Tales of the Town.
It's strong and real.
It's soulful.
It's community and family.
It's the struggle and the optimism in the resistance.
My Oakland.
Oakland, Oakland,
Oakland.
You can emulate it, but you can't duplicate it. This is Oakland.
Joining us now are Abbas, Muntaqim, and Delency, Parham. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
I appreciate you.
Delency, you were there at the march on Sunday. Tell us what that was like.
I think as always, it's good to see the people rightfully enraged when the people continue to suffer at the hands of a violent state. You know, this state being the United States, and its paramilitary wing, the Oakland Police Department. And so anytime you see the people, again, uprising, you understand. But I think what's missing is an organization for the people's energy to guide them towards real radical change, right? Or unless you get people funneling them in to the quote-unquote democracy of the United States, right? Where you'll get the concessions and the reforms, but no real change. Because what has happened since the last uprisings in 2020? People continue to suffer. You know, you still see people sleeping on the streets. We getting West Oakland still got lead in its water. You have public schools getting shut down. What's really changing? So what we trying to do with people's programs is provide people with real programming to see a real change, to where we can organize for change, have real power, so that when we go out, it's not just a protest one day. We seeing real systemic and institutional change in our communities. If we organize the people, give them a real analysis, a real understanding of the social, economic, and political conditions that lead to a Tyree Nichols, that lead to a Breonna Taylor, that lead to a George Floyd, that lead to thousands of people sleeping on the streets in Oakland, that leads to the high unemployment rates, that leads to no health care. You know, we can start putting that revolutionary fervor, that energy into the right places. And that's all that's Oakland missing. And that's what we're trying to provide with people's programs.
You know, when you say nothing's changing, I think one of the things we have seen time and time again are these sorts of videos like the Tyree Nichols one that was released. And I'm curious, Abbas, about your thoughts on that and what seeing these sorts of images does to our psyche collectively.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super important to look at the history of this country. And when we understand history, we can understand what's going on right now, right? So if we look at the history of this country and the history of white supremacist, extrajudicial violence, we look at the lynchings that happened, that took place during slavery, that took place during Jim Crow. Those was very public displays of white supremacist violence, very public displays designed to put fear into the whole community, right? If you rise up and you say we are against slavery, what they do? They lynched you. If you rose up and rose up against the plantation owners, what did they do? They killed you. They lynched you for everybody to see, right? So now we're seeing Fast forward to 2022, 2023, we're seeing these viral videos continually spread over and over and over again. If we look at the case of Michael Brown in 2014, he was murdered. He was killed. His body lay dead in the street for 4.5 hours. And this was a public display for the whole community to see, the whole world to see. And what does that say to our psychological aspect, right? The attempt is to put fear into our minds, right? Back in the day, they sent postcards, and now it's viral on the news. It's viral on Twitter for the whole world to see. And it puts us in a state of fear, and there's research that shows it's giving us like PTSD-like symptoms, because it's our human right to breathe. It's our human right to go to the store, to buy food, to be a human, right? So we have that right to defend ourselves. We have that right to do that. But when they keep us in states of fear, a state of psychosis, we don't defend ourselves. We don't think we have that right.
You're putting a very different type of media out into the world with Tales of the Town. This is a short documentary film, and it's really a multimedia project, right? So you've got a podcast, you've got an art installation, you have the film. Tell me about this project, the history that you learned about over the last 100 years of Oakland.
Tales of the Town, a multimedia project again, right? We got the 12-episode podcast, 11-song album, a book, and now we're doing a short film and art installation. And it's because over time we've realized that you got to meet people where they are. Like a real fact is not everybody can read, not everybody got access to cell phones and podcasts, right? But we still want to be able to reach them in some way. And some people just don't find it enjoyable. So we're trying to meet people where they are and present this history, this knowledge, this raises the consciousness in as many ways as they can possibly get it, right? We look at media and art as just another way for us to use all means at our disposal to make our people aware, right? Boss alluded to, if you don't know your history, you won't know where you're going. And so for us to cover nearly 100 years of black history in Oakland, with our families having migrated from the Deep South to Oakland, well, I wouldn't call it, we say they're refugees, right? Because we came here, and as you can see, with our people sleeping on the streets, with our people being forced out of neighborhoods that we lived in for half a century, having to relocate to Antioch, Pittsburgh, Tracy, right? We refugees. We still haven't really found a home since we left Africa. And so for us, again, you got to know where you're coming from to know where you're going. And that's what Tales of the Town has provided for me personally, is a real deep understanding of my history, right? Which has allowed me to see myself different in present day, and which will, again, yield benefits for my future. And so that's what we're trying to do for the people, is raise consciousness, teach history, and hopefully, motivate, inspire, and ultimately unite, because we're getting this back to organizing. That's what it's all about.
You start the podcast series with a look at the Black Panthers and their work. And I'm curious about how you have taken their work into your own lives and into your own work that you do day to day. They started with giving food to the community. You run people's programs, which in part provides food as well. Abbas, would you tell us a little bit about people's programs?
Yeah, I would say we come from like the afterlife of the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party there is the most significant organization in contemporary and past times that has shown us what it looks like to actually be in the center of our community and to fight back against racist, white supremacist violence, whether it be from these racist people who aren't in the police force or the police force, right? So for us, we see it as the afterlife, right? So the Black Panther Party, they had survival programs, right? Survival pending revolution. And for us at People's Programs, as articulated by Muntaqim, we use what we call decolonization programs. We understand that this land here in America is stolen. It was stolen from the indigenous people. They forced us from Africa and brought us here to America, right? Enslaved us, right? This is a colonized land. We on colonized land right now. So for us, according to international law, we have the right to free ourselves from colonization. That's the international law. It's United Nations, right? So for us, we build what we call decolonization programs in the heart of the community, right? So similar, we have a free breakfast program. In COVID, right, we needed health care, right? So we created a free community health program, right, where we have a clinic literally on wheels. We have doctors and nurses come and serve the people for free, right? So when the state is charging you and the state is actually neglecting the houseless community, neglecting our community, we are saying, okay, the state is not the solution. We, as our own people, we're our solution, and we are going to build these solutions that are offensive in nature, right? So it isn't just merely about surviving and saying, no, we have the right to life. we have the right to go on the offensive for our liberation, for our people's liberation. We don't need to just simply survive. Like, we have the right to live. We have the right to thrive. And this is the inherent nature of survival of our decolonization programs that evolved from survival programs of the Black Panther Party. I think with us both having family in the Black Panther Party too, when we first created these programs, we're like, all right, we don't got to be brand new. We could look back to our own family's history and involvement in the Black Panther Party and say, all right, what could we create? And for us, that first program was People's Breakfast Oakland, and then evolved into a multitude of different programs.
So Tales of the Town is going to debut on February 18th. What can people expect?
And you can expect to be blown away and captivated by 100 years of Oakland Black history. We're going to be telling the stories of our ancestors, people still here before they go, and I think people really going to enjoy it. It's motivating, it's inspiring, it's healing, and people going to have a good time.
All right. Abbas.
Yeah, I'm super excited just to be able to show the film for the people to be able to see like my uncle's story, you know what I'm saying, and being able to tell the history of my family, literally fleeing from the South and coming to Oakland, coming to the East Bay and making that home for themselves, So I'm super excited just to be able to for the community to see it, and hopefully it could raise people's consciousness, make them proud of their history, you feel me? Because so much of our history is like, oh, all these negative things, which is true. Negative things have happened, but we've also resisted. We've also had a lot of love. We've also had a lot of a communal culture and egalitarian beliefs throughout our way of life, you feel me? So we're going to put that on display for the people to see.
Abbas, Muntaqim, Delency, Parham, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
California's housing crunch is in the spotlight this week. The state has a goal to build 440,000 new housing units in the Bay Area by 2030. Cities and counties were supposed to submit their plans for how they're going to build all those houses, apartments, and condominiums this week. But most of them didn't turn in their homework. In the Bay Area, 80% of agencies missed the deadline. Joining us now is KQED housing reporter Adhiti Bandlamudi. Adhiti, thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
So this housing plan, or housing element as it's called, is not new. Has it been this sort of bad in the past?
Well, yes and no. So these housing elements have been due since like the 1960s. States have had to submit plans of how they're going to build more housing or how they're going to allow for more housing, basically to keep up with population growth. But for many, many years, cities have either not actually built the housing, or rather not allowed housing to get built. The second point is that basically there have never been consequences for cities that don't submit their plans or don't allow for more housing. And this, cycle, because we're now in the sixth cycle, that's changing. Governor Newsom basically said cities have to build a record number of housing to basically make up for the gap between, supply and demand. And the other part is that he's now threatening steep consequences for cities that don't submit plans.
You actually went up to Sacramento this week, had an exclusive interview with Governor Newsom about this. You also spoke with Attorney General Rob Bonta. Let's listen to what Rob Bonta had to say.
Everyone has to participate in the solution. No local jurisdiction has to do everything, but every local jurisdiction has to do something. So build, do your part, have a legitimate housing element.
And as you said, they both have been threatening consequences if these housing plans are not submitted. Is that actually going to come to bear?
They say that it will. So basically the state is threatening lawsuits, they're threatening fines, they're threatening to take away funding for transportation and affordable housing projects. But there's also this really interesting thing that's coming into play, which is called the builder's remedy. It's basically this law that has existed for a really long time that has never really been used. What it states is if a city has not submitted a compliant housing plan to build housing, then a developer can go to the city and say, okay, we want to build an affordable housing unit, or we want to build a housing unit. And if it fits certain affordability requirements, like it includes a certain number of units that are affordable, the state can't turn it down. They can just go forth and, theoretically they can start building.
So does this mean that actually the fact that these housing plans weren't submitted kind of opens the floodgates for more housing to be built?
Yes and no. So we know that, projects have been submitted under the builder's remedy. Actually, Southern California cities and counties, they're sort of ahead of the Bay Area in their whole cycle. Their plans to submit housing elements were due last October, and many of them missed. And so developers started submitting builder's remedy plans, or projects rather. We saw those projects in Santa Monica, Redondo Beach, but development hasn't started yet because some people want to litigate those plans. They want to say, well, you can't actually just build housing wherever you want. And other people are saying, yes, you can, because the law says it can. So basically, we're going to have to see how it plays out in court. Also, it's still really expensive and it takes a long time to build housing. Those barriers haven't really been broken down yet. So maybe there could be more housing, but we haven't seen it yet because the market and inflation and all of those different things that go into play when you're looking at building housing.
It is a complex issue, and it becomes intensely personal as well. To pick for a moment on a celebrity in our midst, Steph and Aisha Curry wrote a letter to their town asking for their home to be excluded from the housing plan. And they said, we hesitate to add the not in our backyard, literally rhetoric, but we wanted to send a note before today's meeting. We kindly ask that the town adopts the new housing element without the inclusion of 23 Oakwood. This is a hard thing where even those who say, yes, I want to be for building, get to that point where they say, no, I don't want it here. But there are the other side. There's the YIMBYs, the yes in my backyard, who are also passionate and saying, let's build, and let's seize on this builder's remedy to move things forward.
Exactly. And I mean, to be completely fair, it is a really personal and emotionally sort of fraught topic of where to build housing, because you're really shaping your community. And, there are a lot of people who do want to see housing built, but, in Steph and Aisha Curry's case, the building, there was a multifamily building that was suggested to be built sort of adjacent to their backyard. And, they said that they didn't want it. These are topics, these are conversations and debates that are going on all over the Bay Area. And some of the points are fair. Some people argue, great, you want to build more housing, but will it actually be affordable? That's a real question and a real concern, because building housing is really expensive. And oftentimes, the market rate housing is the only thing that really pencils out.
So let's talk about that, because during the pandemic, we did see construction costs actually go up as people really took that time and said, let's build our own housing additions. ADUs became more popular and more legal, right? That we can build accessory dwelling units on property. Where do we stand on construction costs and labor at this point?
There is still a labor shortage. Construction costs are really high. And back in 2008, 2010, the previous recession that we had, private development slowed down, and a lot of those construction workers were laid off. Now people argue that, we're potentially looking at another recession. To keep that workforce employed, why not build affordable housing in that time? The problem, of course, is that affordable housing is really expensive and it's subsidies driven. So you need government money to back those projects. And the state is looking at a deficit in its budget. So where is that money going to come from? Are those projects really going to materialize? Are people interested in building those right now? The need for housing is very real. How to do it is not totally solved yet.
All right. So these city and county governments missing these deadlines, will they eventually have to turn in this housing element? Do you expect to see them trickle in over the coming months?
Right now, so in the Bay Area, there are 109 jurisdictions that needed to file their housing elements. 2 officially did. That's San Francisco and Alameda. There are a number of cities that are very, very close. They're very, very close.
So that's part of that 20% that we say turned them in.
Basically, 20% includes, I think that number includes, cities that were really close to filing. But I think the state says that we're getting close, and that basically the state is saying that we need to start building housing, and there are going to be consequences for cities that don't file these plans.
All right. Adhiti Bandlamudi, KQED Housing Desk Reporter, thank you for being here and for explaining all of this to us.
Thanks for having me.
In the late 1960s and early 1970s, gay men began moving to San Francisco, eventually claiming the Castro neighborhood as their own. The Castro was vibrant, with many bars and restaurants that came to be beloved establishments over the decades that followed. Political leaders and a civil rights movement also grew in that verdant soil, shaping California with values of tolerance and equality for all. But in recent years, the neighborhood has seen changes. The population is aging, and several of those landmark establishments have closed down. After a long-standing debate due to new management, the city's Historic Preservation Committee decided this week that the Castro Theatre's balcony seats should receive Historic Landmark designation. Joining us now to talk about the historic Castro District neighborhood and what lies ahead is Bay Area reporter, assistant editor John Ferrannini. John, thank you for being here.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So first of all, let's talk about what's happening with the Castro Theatre. There's been a protracted and passionate debate over renovations that are happening there. This week, there was a decision that was made. What is this all about?
Well, what's happening is that the longtime owners of the theater gave up management to Another Planet Entertainment, which viewers may know puts on the Outside Lands Festival. And they want to make a number of changes to the interior of the theater that would allow it to serve as a live music venue as well as show movies. And a number of community groups are upset about this. They feel like this is the last kind of classic 1920s era movie house in San Francisco. And they've put together a coalition that is fighting these changes. And basically, whether or not the interior is landmarked and how much of it is landmarked would kind of dictate how many changes Another Planet can make. And so this is ostensibly about the seats, but in many ways, the kind of emotions and the environment of the neighborhood mean that it's also about kind of who wields power in the neighborhood and what are the future of these institutions.
Yeah, so it really seems like the Castro is changing. Tell me about the demographics there.
Well, there's kind of a debate going on in the LGBTQ community generally, but in the Castro in particular, about there's one school that says, you know, if we want to maintain our institutions, we need to be inclusive, we need to include more and more straight people. And how could we ask for inclusion if we're not willing to give it ourselves? And there's another school of thought that says, well, we don't want our spaces to lose their distinctiveness, their flavor, what makes them LGBTQ spaces. And so, you know, this is happening everywhere, and it's happening under an environment post-COVID where a lot of places are closing and people are gathering in person less and less, and, you know, it's affecting all of society and the LGBTQ community in this particular way.
The population there within the Castro is also aging. Many of them moved in several decades ago.
Yes.
And are finding new places to go.
Yes. I think that one thing, and Cleve Jones has brought this up with me, is that other neighborhoods, people die and they pass their property on to their children or other family members. But, you know, marriage rights for LGBTQ people are pretty recent. And so oftentimes, if someone owns property and dies, it goes to a heterosexual family member who doesn't necessarily care about the neighborhood as much as someone who was gay might care about the neighborhood.
And so do you think there's also a change in society, right? We're seeing that now in society we have much more acceptance of gay people than we did when the Castro was first being formed, right? That is a completely different world here in San Francisco and across the nation than we had back then. Is that impacting who chooses to move to the Castro?
I think that it is. I think there's also kind of more barriers to entry. Everyone knows just how hard it is to move to San Francisco in particular. I think, though, that kind of the question is, you know, societal changes are going to happen or not happen. But the question is, I think a lot of what it means to be LGBTQ came about in the Castro. A lot of these institutions, like the Rainbow Flag, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, the AIDS Memorial Quilt, all of these things came out of the Castro and out of that kind of distinctive melting pot of people physically there in the same space, intentionally building a community together. And so the question is, what happens to LGBTQ people everywhere if that kind of melting pot and creative space doesn't exist in the same way? Yeah. And that also poses questions for social services. It poses questions for, political power, because as you know, like, the concentration of votes in one area means that people can elect someone, but only a few % of the population is LGBTQ generally, so it's not going to have that much of a voice dispersed. So I think those are kind of the questions to look for the answers to, that we don't necessarily know the implications yet.
All right. Bay Area reporter, assistant news editor John Ferrannini, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
The Book Club of California celebrates the history of the written word. Founded in San Francisco in 1912, its lectures and library showcase fine printing and book design. Let's step now into the world of books for this week's look at something beautiful. What a lovely place to spend a few hours on a rainy weekend like this one. If you're interested in joining the book club, you can go to bccbooks.org. That's the end of our show for tonight. You can send questions and comments to us by email at knr@kqed.org. You can find us on Twitter or watch our shows on YouTube and the PBS app. You can reach me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook at Priya D. Clemens. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. We will see you right back here next week.